All right, we're just waiting for David to jump on. He's logging in, hopefully right now, so he should be with us momentarily. Then we'll get going. So just hang tight, everybody. Okay, looks like David is with us.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
FYI, I broke my regular pair of glasses, so this is the only pair of glasses I got. So,
You look cool.
I have to go to the optometrist tomorrow and get some new glasses.
All right, so welcome everybody to our third Q&A regarding the USDA regulations of birds, and happy St. Patty's Day too. I've got a green shirt on. Yeah, yours is kind of green, so you're good.
Dark green.
Last meeting, we were still waiting for some changes to the language that USDA promised us regarding the shipping of unweaned birds, and also a little bit of language on the classification, pet bird versus exotic bird. Looks like that was released yesterday in the Federal Register. And I'll briefly read that in just a moment. But we don't have a set presentation to give right now. We thought we'd just go right into questions. And so use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can enter your questions there. And we'll just go through them. Both David and I, the past week or two, we've been sidelined with all sorts of other responsibilities. So unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to really get the word out on this Q&A. So, it's probably gonna not last as long as the first two did, which is fine. But we'll have plenty of time to get to all your questions. So that's basically the lay of the land. So I'll go ahead and read the language regarding shipping of unweaned birds. And if you remember, prior to our last meeting, the language essentially said you could only ship unweaned birds for veterinary purposes. That's at the end, and that was not the stated intent of USDA. So they did listen to us and correct that language in the actual regulations. That now states carriers and intermediate handlers must not accept unweaned birds for transport unless transport instructions are specified and written by the attending veterinarian and signed within 10 days of shipment. That's it. So essentially, it's kind of what we expected. It's similar to a health certificate that must accompany the birds when they're dropped off at the airport or wherever your shipper is. And that does have to be signed within 10 days. So it's a little bit of a hurdle, but not a huge one. It's a lot better than just saying, no, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But I think on the de minimis, I haven't studied it much other than, it just came out yesterday and I briefly looked at it today. But I think they made a little bit of a clarification.
Yeah, Steve, the change they made, the change they made is simply to clarify that the de minimis, so the 208 bird 200 smaller, 8 bird large rule, which is the new de minimis rule, is annually. So in one calendar
All
year.
right, okay, that was it.
So that's the only change they made. I don't really think it was necessary, but that's the change they made, to just clarify that it is an annual amount now that they're breeding.
Gotcha,
And
okay, that, yeah, I saw that, but thank you, because I
yeah,
didn't have that handy in my mind, so. So
yeah,
those
and,
are the two things that they officially included in the Federal Register, so that's now a part of the regulations.
yeah. They made them as corrections, that they were
Right.
mistakes in the original. So being that they did this way at this time, I definitely don't expect any other changes at this point. But as we spoke about the last time, the lawsuit is still open, so we have to see how Avian Welfare Coalition and the other parties to the lawsuit react to this, and whether they accept this or want to keep going forward with the lawsuit. So from the USDA, it's probably the final word, but we have to see what happens within the next month or so from in the actual lawsuit, and what the other parties decide.
Okay, yeah. So that makes sense. So, while we're waiting for people to submit questions,
Steve, we have some questions that have come
oh,
in.
you have some prior submitted one. All right, go ahead and go through them.
And some from the last time that we missed. So
Okay.
I don't have the name of the person, but it says, it has come to my attention from words of others that all birds will need to be vaccinated for avian influenza. This concerns me because it's ridiculously expensive and yada, yada, yada. So I think I can answer that one quickly. They're not going to require avian influenza vaccines. I don't know where I have a guess as to where that's coming from, is that when you look at the health certificates that they give for other AWA species, there's a section for vaccinations where you can fill it out if you are vaccinating the birds. But there's no current requirement, and there isn't going to be a requirement that you have to vaccinate the birds for anything, much less avian influenza.
That might come from the National Poultry Improvement Plan. I think, I'm not sure about that, but that may be where that comes from, which is separate from the Animal Welfare Act, so that wouldn't apply as far as the Animal Welfare Act is concerned.
Yeah, yeah, but so no, there's not going to be a requirement that you have to vaccinate your birds for anything, and not avian influenza. There's another one that came in that says, what reason does the USDA present for treating non-stakeholder ideas and recommendations as having any value or relationship to the appropriate care of birds when they have no birds and basically knows very little about what constitutes bird care? So I think this is a complaint about the animal rights comments that have been the basis for some of the stuff in the regulations. What is treated as a stakeholder under the Administrative Procedure Act is a very broad category. So organizations who are interested in animal welfare are stakeholders. So that's why AR groups have gotten their comments in and have been heard. I think that's the simple answer to that. It's just the definition of stakeholder is much broader than just people who breed the birds or people who are in the business. And then okay, so Orinda, oh no, that's not their name. Even though I'm a de minimis as a seller, do I still have to get a license if I wish to ship one of my 8 birds by air transport? So no. If you are de minimis, that means you can ship without needing a USDA license. However, we talked about this the last time. The carriers are going to be licensed to ship, so you still will have to deal with, the USDA Animal Welfare Act regulations based on what the shippers are going to apply to you. So, for example, you might be de minimis, but Delta is going to be the USDA license, so you're still going to have to get that health certificate to ship the bird because Delta is licensed.
Got it.
Steve, we got so a couple of them have come in. I don't know if you want to take a couple.
Actually, David, George is actually on the line.
Oh, hey George, do you have a question?
No, you answered my question about
okay.
Delta having to comply with Delta's regulations. And so I guess they're going to be promulgating them shortly.
Well, no, the regulations for Delta are already in the Animal Welfare Act. They're in what already came out. So the question is now, once Delta puts them into starts acting on them, and Delta might wait till August, or Delta might start, complying with the regulations sooner if they choose to.
All right. So in September, I want to ship an Amazon parrot to Florida. What do I have to do that's been different? I've been doing this for 10 years. All I do is make a reservation and I take the bird down to the airport. The cage has to be certain, has to have certain configurations, and then it goes.
Yeah, George. So the changes that are in the Animal Welfare Act, the ones that we understand are not making things much different than what you already did. What you already do. Your crate, the crates that we already use are already to IATA standards. The changes that we don't know what they're going to be are how Delta is going to react to what Delta has to do. So I can't tell you what you're going to have to do because it's basically Delta's going to read the regulations and make their business decision about how they want to apply them. So, we have to wait and see what Delta decides to do. Nothing is affecting you directly. Nothing is changing on your end. Your crates are still going to be the same. You're still going to be able to ship them. You just need this health certificate if you're shipping unweaned now. But we have to wait and see what Delta decides to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got something, you want me to take the first one in the Q&A?
Well, I was going to say Cliff is asking about shipping and face-to-face transactions, so I think that follows well off the last one. So, so Cliff, the way the de minimis work, the way the exemptions work, is de minimis is one exemption and face-to-face transaction is another exemption. So if you are de minimis, you can ship. If you go over de minimis, though, the only way that you get out of being licensed is by being a retail pet store. So the face-to-face transaction. So they are non-inclusive definitions. So you can be de minimis, or you can be a retail pet store, or you can be both. But you only need one to be exempt from the USDA.
The exemptions are kind of standalone. So, if you're exempt, then you're exempt, basically.
Yeah, what Steve said, as Steve said it clearer than I did. They're standalone. So you as long as you fall into one or the other, you don't need a USDA license.
Yeah, but your comment that shipping is not face-to-face, you're exactly right. It isn't, and that's why the retail pet store exemption won't apply if you ship more than the de minimis. But as long as you stay below the de minimis, you can ship. But as David was explaining earlier, this is where it gets complicated, because Delta is a USDA licensed shipper carrier. They're currently licensed to ship mammals. And our best way to understand how that might play out for us with birds is to look at how Delta handles mammals. And right now it follows the Animal Welfare Act regulations. What we're concerned about in the bird industry is that, using Delta as the example, Delta is leaning towards not accepting birds for shipment anyways, regardless of the Animal Welfare Act. Delta still does it, but that's a business decision that Delta has to make. Are these bird regulations clear enough for them that they don't see any additional risk in accepting bird shipments? Because if they accept a bird shipment against the regulations, they're liable. That's a business risk. So again, that's a Delta decision. All we're working with here is the Animal Welfare Act regulations. We can't guess how Delta is going to react to that because they can, accept shipments or not. That's up to them. But if they do accept shipments, these are the requirements that must be met. So that's how that works. So, okay. So go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, so I was looking through the questions, Steve. There's a couple that I think follow nicely on this. So Andrew asks, is this strictly for air shipping or does this apply to UPS, USPS? So it applies to everyone that's considered a carrier. And a carrier includes USPS, any sort of ground transport. It's basically anyone who's in the business of moving birds, that their primary business is the movement or shipment. So if that's if you're a breeder who occasionally drives a bird to a client, you're not a carrier, but an airline, USPS, or any sort of other business who gets paid for just doing that is a carrier, and so it would apply to them.
Okay, kind of following along on this topic specifically, question is, do the AWA transport requirements specifically require health certificates for adult birds? No, for adult birds, I don't think they do. Is that correct, David? Yeah.
No,
So
they don't.
The health certificate we're talking about, we're using the term health certificate because that's analogous. That's for shipping unweaned baby birds. So it's a specific set of instructions similar to a health certificate that is going to be required if you're shipping unweaned birds. So we throw that term health certificate around, but yeah, don't confuse the two. It's really a certificate for shipping unweaned birds, or more specifically or more accurately, it's care instructions signed by a vet that must accompany the shipment. Let's see. There was another, okay, USPS does not ship any mammals. They will not be accepting live pet birds once these regulations go into effect. Is this correct? Well, it may be, it may not be. Even though USPS is a government agency, I looked this up after the last call, they would have to be licensed by USDA, two different federal government departments or agencies having to license each other. But yeah, that's how it would work. If they're going to be shipping birds, they would have to become licensed. So I don't know how that will play out with the Postal Service. Will they get a license? Will they not? Will there be some sort of workaround? I don't know. David, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it's a little weird to say, but it's just a business decision. USPS is gonna see whether it's worth their time, money, and effort to continue shipping birds. I don't think a lot of people ship unweaned birds through USPS. I think it's mostly poultry and doves, but so things that aren't going to need a health certificate like we're calling it. But again, it's going to be, I think it's just going to boil down to the business decision of USPS, and we have to see. And I'm sure they'll probably wait. I'm sure they, just like Delta, will probably wait until August to make this decision. So we'll see when August rolls around, we'll see what they decide to do.
Okay, I think I hit the wrong button on a couple questions, so I'm going to the answered ones to make sure we don't lose them. Sharon writes, if a bird club has an expo and the members bring their own birds for the public to see, does anyone have to be regulated? And no, a bird expo or a bird mart where you're selling birds face to face, that falls under basically the retail exemption. So as long as if you're an owner of a booth that sells birds there and you don't ever ship birds, you don't have to be licensed. If all your sales are face to face, that's okay. But you may have to be licensed for other reasons. For example, if that's not the only place you sell birds, if you sell birds to the local pet store, you're a wholesaler, which means you would have to have a dealer's license if you sell more than the de minimis. Again, that's separate from the bird expo, but the expo itself and the people with the booths there, because of that activity alone, if that's all they do, they don't have to be licensed for that, no. What was the other one? Jean wrote, customer comes here while on vacation, sees birds, meets me, etc. Now she wants her new bird shipped since she cannot drive the bird back with her. How will that work if unlicensed? Well, David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That's once you ship it, doesn't matter. It's not a face-to-face transaction anymore. So as soon as you're shipping that bird, you're gonna have to fall under the de minimis.
Yeah.
To avoid licensing. In other words, if it's an African gray, you can ship up to 8 of them a year that way.
Yeah.
But if you ship more than 8, you would have to be licensed. Even if all the customers came, met you, said hi to their little baby, and then you shipped it to them later, you're allowed to do 8 of those a year only.
Yeah, that's correct. That's how I would understand the situation.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. I think that was, yeah. All right. So we'll go back to the open ones. Let's see. Let's say I have a business breeding birds and my wife has a business breeding birds. My birds are kept at my property and my wife's at a neighboring property not owned by us, leased. Can we ship 400 small birds per year without getting licensed? Everybody's really trying to find a workaround to try to double. Honestly, I guess if it's separate ownership and they're in separate facilities, I don't know how they would treat it if it's husband and wife. I don't know, David, what do you think?
So the rule is currently written says that 2 people living on the same property can't double up the number.
Right.
What they're getting at here is basically having 2 facilities. And it's one of those things where I don't think the question has an answer, because it would require one, seeing it in practice, and 2, it's a gray area. So they're probably not gonna accept it, and they'll probably fight you on it, and then it boils down to whether you win that fight or not. I think if you're selling 400 birds a year, you're better off getting licensed than trying to figure out the workaround. It might work, it might not. I mean, the rule says clearly, one, husband and wife can't have 2 separate collections. It's one facility. So, if you have an adjacent property leased, I think there's an argument to be made. If I was a government attorney, I would make the argument, yeah, it's an adjacent leased property, but that creates one facility. If you have your birds on the left side of the train tracks and your wife has it 2 miles over on the right side of the train tracks, that might be 2 separate. That's probably 2 separate facilities, and you can sell 200 out of each. But if it's just I leased my neighbor's property and my wife put her collection over there, but they're adjacent properties, I don't think it would work. But it's a gray area. It's not. There's no clear answer to it. But I wouldn't try it.
Agreed on that one. Yeah, that's rough. And, then you have community property issues going on if it's a husband and wife.
Yeah.
That complicates it further, but yeah. You would probably have to argue, and I don't know if it's worth it by that point. I think you probably should just get licensed. Ashley writes, has anyone heard of minor birds? Will or will not be added to the pet bird list, what she's asking about. And I don't know. I don't recall seeing minors listed on there. Did you?
No, Steve, I told people to write into Cody to get minus to request minus be on the list. Likewise with corvids, crows.
Yeah.
And he responded to most people who wrote into him wanting data about people having minus. And I've been meaning to get back to him with some of that data, but I honestly don't really have that data. I know minors and crows are sold commonly. I mean, they show up on birds for sale on Birds Now regularly, but they are currently not on the list, and I think we've hit the point where they're going to start pushing back, adding certain things to the list, and I think whether minors get on there or not is up in the air at the moment. I think they do qualify. I mean, lots of people have minors, but I mean, I think more people have minors than kookaburras, and kookaburras are on the list. So
probably,
yeah. So, but it is something we're still working on, and we need to push it back on with Cody a bit to see if we get minors and corvids on the list.
Yeah. All right, Andrew writes, if you live in an area with no avian vet, what is someone to do in order to get a health certificate? I am NPIP and I have New York State, DC licenses, etc. There is no available vets anywhere near me, nor would they be willing to see anything other than a parrot. Okay, Andrew, there's no requirement that it has to be an avian vet. So I don't know if that helps you, but any vet can serve this purpose. This has got to be a licensed vet. But the veterinary requirements in the Animal Welfare Act are fairly stringent, and certainly it's going to require a lot of agriculturists to adapt to that. Not just for health certificate. You need an attending vet to be licensed. And your attending vet is, they're looking for them to be at your facility physically there at least once a year. That's regardless of the USDA inspectors coming out. Your own vet needs to be on site and needs to approve of your veterinary care plan. So whatever vet you're using to do that is most likely going to be the one that you're going to get your unweaned baby bird certificate if you're shipping. It's likely going to be the same person, but it could be any licensed vet in your state. Actually, it could be any licensed vet anywhere. It could be your attending vet. But again, you're going to have a licensed vet in your state come to your facility at least once a year. So, that's what you're going to want to look for.
Okay, thank you.
And just to build on that a little bit, Steve, to clarify, you don't need an avian vet. It can be any vet. And the unweaned rule doesn't say that the vet has to see your birds that you're shipping. Simply that they have to have written and signed the instructions relating to the shipment. So, this is really, if you have a relationship with a vet, say, hey, vet, I've written up my shipment instructions. I have them available. Can you just sign them so I can put these birds on a plane and email it over them for their signature? It's like getting a prescription on them. If they can do it over the phone with just talking to you, you don't actually have to, take a crate of birds over to the vet and show them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Cliff writes, if you're not licensed, you can sell to pet stores as long as you stay under the yearly 8/200 de minimis. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if that's a wholesale, right? If you're selling to somebody else who's reselling the birds you sell them, you can sell up to 8 large birds or 200 small birds without being licensed. And it's actually, you can sell 8 large birds and 200 small birds. So the maximum you can sell is 208 birds, to clarify that further, at wholesale annually. Anything to add there, David?
No, and I would just clarify that, and I think this goes to sort of one of the other questions Cliff is asking, is that if you fall into the other exemption, the retail pet store exemption, the limit on that one is that you can't wholesale. So you can wholesale under the 208 rule, but you can't wholesale under the pet store exemption. So that's the rub. So Cliff asks another question, says, what if you have a hand feeder offsite, you pay or split the profit, and they do the face-to-face sale? Cliff, there's not a good answer to that. I mean, that's a weird fact pattern, and I would have to see the actual facts to give you a better decision, a better answer to the question. But like, if you're selling them to the hand feeder, then that sounds to be a wholesale transaction, because the hand feeder is then going to resell. So then you have to stay under the de minimis. But if it's a profit sharing thing, that's a weird fact pattern that may have a different answer, but it would really be fact dependent. You'd have to actually look at this. This is another one of those gray area questions where you would have to see the actual facts. But just on going off what you're asking, I would say if you're selling them to the hand feeder who then resells them, that's wholesaling. That's definitely wholesaling. And so you would have to meet the de minimis. You would have to be in the de minimis category, not the retail pet store category.
Yeah, I would say that, it's 2 separate businesses the way you're describing it. You're breeding birds and selling them to a hand feeder who's off the property. In that case, you would have to be licensed. And if that hand feeder is selling only face-to-face, then that hand feeder is essentially a retail pet store. Now, if you're asking if you breed all your birds on one facility and your hand feeder takes them home, hand feeds them, there's no sales involved, that's just your normal process for your business, is your babies go to a separate site for hand feeding, and then they're sold from that site. No, I don't believe you would need to be licensed if all your birds were sold that way. There's a gray area, but that's the way I'm leaning. But as soon as you start shipping again and don't meet the de minimis for shipping less than 8 or 200 small birds, you're going to have to be licensed for that. So it kind of doesn't matter anymore. But if we were to take your business as being 100%, you raise babies on your property, they get transferred, not sold, just moved to a separate facility to hand feed, then they're all sold in face-to-face, I don't believe that requires a license.
So Steve, he has a follow-up question about, will the hand feeders residents need to be inspected? And that's one of those questions that it's not clear from the regulations, but I believe they will. And the question is whether they're going to treat it as 2 facilities that need 2 separate licenses, or they're going to let you treat it as 1 facility. But basically, where the birds are being hand fed is part of that chain, is part of that dealer business. So yes, you will need to, if you tell them I hand feed them, my hand feeder who works for me lives 2 doors down and they do it in their kitchen, they're gonna want to inspect the kitchen where the birds are hand fed. So
yeah, that's how I understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a practical point, maybe don't tell the USDA inspector that if you don't want the hand feeder room to be inspected. So a question for David: if you are unlicensed, what authority does the USDA have to access your property? Could they demand access to your property or records of sale, etc.? So this is basically a Fourth Amendment question. The USDA has no special authority that would allow them to inspect anybody at random. You're going to fall under probable cause. And, you know, without giving a legal lecture on what is probable cause, you know, someone will either need to say, I know that guy over there sells birds, and I know that he sells more than 200 a year, and I know he doesn't have a USDA license. And then they could, you know, they'd probably voluntarily come talk to you. And if they, you know, and if you are, you know, don't voluntarily agree to talk to them, you know, they always have the authority to come get some sort of warrant to come inspect your property and your records. But it would basically be, basically you're under the Fourth Amendment. It's probable cause. Somebody would need to say, you know, I know what they're doing, and or they would have to figure it out some other way, you know, through your social media, through anything that's publicly available, to figure out that there's reason to believe that you need to be licensed and are operating without a license.
Yeah, and if you're doing, you know, any type of activity that would require you to have a license, such as you're wholesaling to another USDA licensed facility, you know, they're going to get your name and address for all the birds they buy from you anyway. That's part of the requirement. So in the process, if USDA is auditing them and looking at their source records, and they see your name popping up, indicating you sell them more than the de minimis, that's how USDA is going to find you without anybody complaining about it, right?
Yeah.
The other way the USDA is going to find out is somebody's going to turn you in. So, hey, this guy's over here selling birds and selling lots of birds, and he's unlicensed. And they report that to USDA. USDA is going to follow up on that. So do they have the authority to do that? Well, they kind of do under the Animal Welfare Act. USDA just administers the regulation. But if you're in violation of that regulation, you know, USDA can call in the authorities and put a stop to you, essentially. But once you're in the activity, you're going to need to be licensed, for example, to ship birds with Delta. If you're shipping lots of birds, Delta or any other carrier is going to want your USDA license, unless you're doing it minimally, de minimis. You know, again, that's where we get into Delta's decision of continuing to do this or not, because they essentially have to police part of it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody from now on, pretty much everyone's gonna have to keep records. So, you know, it's gonna be hard. Let me rephrase that. It's the government, so they may be very lax about this if they choose to be. But if they want to figure out that you are selling birds, you know, and you're selling them to brokers and stores and shipping them on Delta, you know, all they're gonna have to do is say, okay, let's talk to everyone he might be selling and look and pull out the logbooks. And they can, you know, if you're selling 100 birds to me, I'm gonna have to keep the log, and I have to show my logbook when they want to see it. So they'll come to me and say, hey, David, we think so and so is selling you birds, and we think he needs a license because he's over the de minimis. Show me your logbook. And I can't say no. I'm gonna have to say, here's my logbook, and you can search for his name on it. And so, you know, and once they do that, that'll get them to probable cause, which, you know, they can't just knock on your door. They can knock on your door and say, we would like to inspect. You can say no, but if they have probable cause, they can go get a warrant. Just like if you were a burglar or whatever, and they had evidence that you were involved in crime, you know, they can go get their warrant and come inspect you if you say no. So moving on, Ashley asks, can I take my hawkhead to Parrot Festival 2024 without a license? Yes, if it's a pet. If you're an exhibitor and you're over certain thresholds, and hawkhead isn't currently on the pet list, so If you're an exhibitor, it's a different issue. But if it's just your pet and you're just taking your pet out with you to hang out, that's fine. You don't need a USDA license, regardless of whether it's on the pet list or not.
Alicia wrote in, said, at what point should those of us that know we need to be licensed start the process? Do all the proposed changes need to be approved and or denied before USDA can and will start to run operations for inspections? So it actually has nothing to do with all the changes and approvals. It's already been approved. The final regulations already been published. So yeah, they're making corrections to that, but that's a done deal. But USDA has said that they're not going to even start on new licenses for 6 months. Well, now it's probably 5 months. So the clock is ticking. So I wouldn't bother filling out an application yet. Certainly if you go on the USDA site and look at the applications, there's nothing there regarding birds yet. It's all dogs, cats, et cetera, all mammals. So they haven't even updated the application form yet to include birds. And that's going to take a little bit of time. So for new facilities, unlicensed facilities applying for a new license, you're going to start that process at the earliest in roughly 5 months from now. The licensure process can take up to 3 months because you're allowed 3 pre-inspections before your license gets approved. So if you have a pre-inspection and you don't pass everything, you have corrections that need to be made, you can have another pre-inspection before your license is approved. That whole process can take up to 3 months. If they come on your first pre-inspection and everything's cool, you'll be approved theoretically in about a month from the time you put in your application. So you'll get 1 to 3 months. And the requirement is that we all have to be licensed. Those of us who need to be licensed are going to have to be licensed in a year, or now 11 months. So if you start 5 months from now to 8 months from now, that's a reasonable window to get your license in and approved. And if it takes longer than that because USDA is swamped with things, then they'll have to deal with it at that point. But that's the approach they're using at this time.
Yeah, I think everything Steve said is correct. So it's we're still in wait and see mode on the actual licensing procedure. But what's out there is what's out there, and that's what it's going to be.
Right.
Barring something extraordinary happening with the litigation.
Yeah. Okay, George writes, is there any ongoing effort to meet with Delta's management to help them make a good business decision that affect our members? Well, yes and no. There are industry people who have met with Delta prior to the Animal Welfare Act. So these are ongoing meetings with Delta. Our concern is the Animal Welfare Act is just one more thing that makes shipping birds more difficult or more risky for Delta. And again, that's a business decision. It has nothing to do with the Animal Welfare Act itself, other than the Animal Welfare Act is going to influence Delta's personal decision. So yeah, there are ongoing efforts, but they've been ongoing for a while. So probably why Delta still accepts bird shipments, and they haven't stopped already.
Yeah, and I mean, whether it's a good business decision, George, that's Delta's decision.
Yeah,
they look at their numbers and decide whether we make financial sense for them.
right. And to be honest with you, most of us, aviculture, we're like a gnat. with Delta, right? We are unimportant to them. But there are commercial shippers who do a lot of business with Delta. And, those are the people that have the pull. But, I don't think we can mount any sort of public pressure campaign, but, if it came to that, we might have to, right? But, I guess that's about all I could say about that meeting with Delta's management. They've got bigger problems. They've got airplanes and FAA inspections on top of USDA. So, yeah.
Steve, there's a couple in the webinar chat.
Some people are
asked,
putting in questions via email and text message. So if you check the chat section there, you have a couple extra.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at just now.
Someone asked here, health certificate birds have to be done by a nationally accredited vet. Most dog and cat vets are only class 1. That is for health certificate. I don't know what kind of what certificate he's talking about for unweaned birds. Whatever vet's supposed to be writing, I need to know what I'm supposed to write. So it's not a health certificate, like we said earlier. We've sort of just been calling that as for a shorthand. It's shipping instructions. And the shipping instructions just have to be written by a vet. That's the requirement. There's no accreditation, no special requirements. A vet just needs to write and sign your shipping instructions. What are shipping instructions? Doesn't say. But assuming it's going to be when the bird needs to be fed and how long it can be in transit. So that's what I would say would be the bare minimum on the shipping instructions. Maybe USDA will give us some guidance on this in the future. But basically, it's just shipping instructions. It can be signed by any vet, and it's basically the things that Delta already makes you write on the box when you're shipping. Which, when was the last time it was fed? When should it be fed? When it's received? Should it be fed in transit? Yada yada. Steve, you want to add anything to that?
No, yeah, that's it. USDA is, for them, as long as it's a licensed vet. That's it. It doesn't have to be class 1, class 2, or anything else, as far as I know. It's just a licensed veterinarian.
Yeah. Someone asked, at what point should those of us that know we need to be licensed start the process?
I answered that one already.
Yeah, I answered that one already.
Mark Reynolds has one in chat.
Yeah, the government can also pull your shipping records from airlines, which now show the type and numbers of birds you have shipped through the year. Had this happen with U.S. Fish and Wildlife many years ago. So yeah, I mean that's what we're saying. Because the carriers are going to be licensed, they're going to have to keep records of what's going on the planes and who's shipping. So if there's anyone who says, well, I think David's selling 200 birds a year and shipping them, they'll be able to go to Delta and say, okay, you're a USDA licensed carrier. You need to show us your logbooks, show us, pull out the data for David Garcia, and it'll show that I shipped 201 birds. And that's how they'll come to my door and say, we have evidence you've been shipping too many birds. You need a license.
All right, Cliff has one in the Q&A chat box. Says, in the last Zoom, Animal Welfare Act requires raccoon proofing. It was the first time I hear that mentioned. How would this be interpreted on outside flights? Well, my understanding is that your flights have to be constructed in a manner that prevents predators from getting at the birds inside. And I think it's, I hate to use the word sort of common sense, but yeah, if you have flights with birds in them that raccoons can reach in and grab your birds, and that's happening, that's where you're going to have a problem. But if you have a whole bunch of flights well, you're not losing birds to raccoons, you're probably meeting it. And so this is one of those weird things about language and regulations. You can make it really specific, which can protect you, but it can also hurt you. So the way these regulations are written, they're written as performance standards. So as long as you have a reasonable looking design to protect your birds from predators, and you're not having problems with predators, you should be fine. David.
Yeah. So Cliff, like Steve said, it's performance-based standards. So if they cut, you have to keep track of your deaths now as well. So if they come and they look at your logbook and you have, in the last year, 10 entries for death by raccoon, they're going to say you're not meeting the standard. But if they come look at your logbook and there's no death by raccoon, as long as you have, cages that reasonably seem to do the job, you're fine. And the cages don't need to be raccoon proof. They just need to be built in such a manner that reasonably prevents harmful wildlife from entering the cage. So, what does that mean? Well, for some of us, that might mean that we use 1/2 inch by 1 inch wire. For some other people, it might mean, we use bigger wire, but we have an electrified perimeter. So it all depends on on how you structure it. And again, some practical advice, you're going to have power over what you write down in the logbook. And so if you have a raccoon problem, solve the raccoon problem, but maybe also don't write raccoons on your logbook. That's just a bit of practical advice. But basically, it's just the rule basically means if you have regular deaths from wild animals eating your birds, that's not in compliance. You need to do something about it. You can't just say, well, I lose 10 birds a year to raccoons. That's just the price of doing business. No, it's not. It's not the price of doing business anymore.
All right, Ben just popped up with us. Says, I noticed you mentioned Delta several times. Are there other airlines that can be used to ship birds? Yes, there are other airlines. Most don't ship birds anymore. Alaska Airlines does, but you have limited destinations for Alaska. What is it? American, I think, also does, right?
American does, but they're significantly more expensive. I think they're double the price.
Right.
Yeah.
So Delta is the main airline that ships our animals, birds, because they're reasonably affordable, and they do a pretty high volume of live animal shipments. Lots of other airlines don't want to touch it. It's just too much trouble for them. So that's why we worry about this. If this becomes too risky for a business like Delta to comply with the requirements, then it's easy for them just to say, no, we're not going to do it anymore. And that's going to affect our industry tremendously. But again, that's a business decision. So.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see. Do we have any other ones?
I think at this point we have them all. Yeah. So I don't see any more open questions either in chat or in Q&A. Give it just a minute and stall in case something pops up. But I figured this Zoom meeting was going to be a little shorter than the rest. Looks like my camera froze there. That's all right. But okay, yeah, it says thanks, guys. All right, so yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for us then. This most likely won't be the last Q&A we do. So stay tuned for more. We'll try to get some announcements out there, and spread the word far and wide. Cliff writes, I missed the first 5 minutes, so de minimis was addressed and 8 large is set. Yes, 8 large, 200 small, and the dividing line is 250 grams. So 8 birds over 250 and or 200 under 250. There you have it. It goes by the average weight for the species. It's not, if you happen to ship some birds that weigh right around 250 grams, you can't put them on a diet to get them under. This is established averages for that species. That's what they're going by.
Yeah, you can't line breed your Amazons to weigh 240 grams.
Any rationale why 8 large? No, they picked that answer out of the thin air. That was their best determination. The 250 gram, they basically looked at the weights of all the birds and came out. I have to say, it's a pretty reasonable number. It's a decent dividing line. I would love to see that 8 large increase, though. That's, it's a big difference between 8 and 200. But again, most of the birds that are under 200 are things like zebra finches and budgies, which are, shipped in huge numbers, and considerably smaller than 200 grams. But yeah, why I don't know of any rationale other than they're throwing a dart at a dartboard, and that's what they came up with.
Steve, someone's writing into me that we haven't answered a bunch of questions, but I don't know where they're coming in. Nick, do you know where we've missed some questions?
There are some folks on the OPA Facebook page that haven't followed through to Zoom. Okay. If you can access that.
I'll take a look over there. Let's see.
Just make sure you're muted when you go to that page.
I don't see where to access those.
I'll try and filter some into you.
Yeah, if you want to read some off, if you're seeing them, we can answer them.
I hear myself when I speak. That's why it's so delayed. So there's one in chat from Teresa.
Okay, it says, I have an aviary. I breed large birds, but sell less than 8 birds a year. I hand feed the babies in the house. The breeders are in another facility on premises. All sales are in person. Will I be required to be licensed? That's an easy one, Teresa. Congratulations. No, you don't need to be licensed if that's how you're doing business. Yeah. So you can sell also, if you're doing face-to-face transactions, maybe you sell 100 birds a year that way. You're still exempt, and you can also ship up to 8 large birds. Doesn't matter how many you sell face-to-face, the de minimis applies to the ones you're shipping or the ones you're selling wholesale. So that's the other caveat with the retail pet store exemption. If you raise all your birds on premises, and let's say the local pet store owner comes to your facility and you're selling your birds to him face to face, but he's buying your birds to take to his pet store and resell them, then you're not a retail pet store, you're a wholesale dealer. And you can only sell up to 8 in that case. Yeah, lots of little slightly different scenarios, but that's how that one would work out.
Steve, I got one here that I've heard a couple times, which is that the person has heard that there's going to be a rule regarding the number of birds per amount of acreage. I don't know where that one's coming from, but there's no rule about that. There's no acreage size requirement. If you can stack the bird tight at your property, there's no a rule about it. There is sort of a rule within the rule that people miss, which is that your property will have to be fenced though. You're not allowed to have an open field. So, if you have the birds, if you have 100 acres, you have to fence the area around the birds. If you have an acre, you're probably gonna have to fence the property. But you can't just have it, because you have to prevent the public from interacting with the birds. So there's no acreage requirement, but there is a fence requirement. I don't know where the acreage thing is coming from. Do you have any idea?
Well, my best guess would be there's a confusion between local regulations and the USDA. So lots of counties or municipalities have limits based on the size of the property or whether you're zoned residential versus agriculture. And a lot of times those limits are based upon the size of the property. None of that has anything to do with the federal USDA regulations of birds. They're completely separate. And USDA does not enforce your local requirements. So if you're sitting on an acre and you're allowed to have 20 birds and you have 21 and USDA comes up, they're not there to enforce your local county regulations. They're only looking at USDA regulations.
Yeah. And inversely, by being USDA licensed doesn't mean that you're exempted from your local regulations. So you're still going to have to meet both, whether that's your county or your state regulations and the USDA regulations. So that's just a point to remember.
Okay, somebody wrote, can we talk about exhibitors, please? And David, I think we were both saving that specific topic for another Q&A. We kind of kicked that can down the road because both David and I have been buried in other things the past couple of weeks. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, exhibitors is its own can of worms. It has a lot of nuances to it. The short of it is that if you are exhibiting for any sort of compensation, you need a license. However, there is some exemptions built in for people who are exhibiting their pet birds that live on the property with them and they don't make a significant income from it. But I think we should save that topic for a separate USDA, a separate Q&A for two reasons. One, I need to do a little more digging on it to be comfortable speaking about it, but also it has a lot of exemptions that I feel like we're going to confuse people. If we talk about exhibitor and breeders together, people are going to get confused. And it's sort of two topics that really need to be kept segregated because they're two very different things that could very easily confuse people with the exemptions. So keep an eye out. We promise we will have a Q&A for everyone who's an exhibitor very, very soon in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, that's basically it. It's if you're exhibiting for any sort of money, you need a license. However, there are some exemptions, and we'll cover it on another Q&A.
All right, Dan wrote, and this is an important distinction again, because we've been dancing around this and haven't made this clear, but he makes a great comment. Says the 200 small bird, 8 large bird only applies to birds listed as pet species, correct? Non-listed birds, even one bird sold, requires a license. Yes, that is absolutely correct, including retail pet stores. So you don't even get a retail pet exemption for a bird that isn't listed as a pet bird. That's why that distinction is so important, and why we've been trying to get the typical birds added to it that we need. And it does get difficult because in aviculture, I almost can't think of any bird that isn't sold into the pet trade or as a pet. I mean, I had a pet emu. I've got pet hornbill. I've got all sorts of different things that aren't normally considered pets. But you're exactly right, Dan. One non-pet bird listed species, you need a license, no matter how you sell it.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. If it's not on the pet bird list, you need a license just to sell one.
All right, Becky writes, if we sell less than 200 birds a year, do we need a license? Is there a dollar amount also? So the way USDA has done the de minimis, it's not based on dollar amount at all. It's strictly numbers of birds. So if you're selling 200 birds less than 250 grams, and since we just went over Dan's comment, and those birds are listed as pet birds, you're under the de minimis. If you sell one bird that's not listed as a pet bird, you need to be licensed. It has nothing to do with how much they're worth or how many dollars you sell in a year. It's strictly a numbers of birds game.
Steve, so Jessica asks, has a decision been made on Cape parrots and the pet bird list? I know that Poicephalus under 250 grams, but Capes are in a gray area because they're larger than that. So I've reached out to Cody about this one. My gut says they're Poicephalus, so they're pet birds, and they're just going to be treated as the large bird. But yes, the list is unclear on that for larger and smaller birds, and I've reached out to Cody, and he hasn't answered me, which makes me think that it's percolating up the chain of command to figure out what they're going to do with that. But that's basically it. No decision, quote unquote, has been made yet. We're waiting to see if they clarify the list by putting Capes on the large bird side and small Amazons on the small bird side. We're waiting to see about that.
Yeah, that's my understanding. So the Capes are included as pet birds. They're just not small pet birds. They're large pet birds because they're over the 250. That's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it would just be nice for them to clarify that large Poicephalus are large pet birds. But that's we're waiting to see. I think they will eventually say something on it. It's just I think they're just trying to figure it out themselves. But yeah, we don't have a final decision on that yet, Jessica.
So Peggy writes, so I can sell directly to private buyers over the limit. Example, selling 20 baby macaws to a private buyer who wants to raise and keep them all. Yeah, that would be an exempt activity. So that would not require you to be licensed. But if you're selling to anyone who is reselling them, yes, then you have that 8 bird de minimis. If you're selling more than 8 to somebody who's reselling them, 8 macaws, then yeah, you would need to be licensed. Yeah.
So Teresa asks one more question. I have 10 pairs of birds in the aviary. Not all of them are breeders or breeding. Is there a limit to what a breeder can have before being licensed? So this is going back to the idea of what you need to be licensed. It's not based on what you have. You can have 1,000 pair of birds and not breed them, or keep everything you breed, and not need a license. If you have 1,000 pair of green cheeks and you keep every bird that they breed every year for yourself, just because you're a hoarder or whatever, you don't need to be licensed at that situation. Likewise, if you have 1,000 pair of green cheeks and you take at every egg they take, you throw it out, you don't need to be licensed in that situation. It's only once you go over the de minimis or you are not a retail pet store that you need to get a license.
Okay, Susan writes, where do you find the list of birds that are not listed as pets? Well, and it looks like the link to the USDA website has been.
Yeah, I put it in the chat.
And it was shared in the Facebook chat as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, and Cliff, let's see, I don't know if we can answer, it's a little off topic. He says, I raise cattle and chickens and get the USDA census questionnaire. Section 22, other livestock. It has inner livestock type. And, do parrots fall into that category? Is that a question you can answer? I think you'd have to go to USDA about that.
No,
What do you think?
I can answer that. Parrots are not livestock because the definition of livestock is any animal raised for food or fur or feathers.
Yeah.
So, do you raise your macaws only to make headdresses? Then maybe you could argue that your macaws are livestock. But unless you're eating them or making down pillows out of their feathers, parrots don't count as livestock. The livestock rule is for poultry. In the bird category is for poultry. It's chicken, ducks, and goose that are eaten. Other than that, it's not livestock. And under the USDA, chickens that are kept for pets or for fanciers are not livestock. So that's a slightly confusing point. If you're keeping your chickens for food, they're livestock and unregulated. If you're keeping your chickens because you're a fancier, then they're pet birds and you need a license.
All right, Dan just popped up here, says if I keep and breed a non-pet species for my own enjoyment and never sell offspring, do I require a license? What if I trade with other breeders for a non-monetary transaction? Well, if you never sell them, that's the easy one. You do not need a license. Trading, I don't think so. What do you know about that, David? Gray area.
That's a difficult one. Because if you're trading, with a financial goal, I think you probably would be regulated. But if you're just trading for conservation purposes or just for personal purposes, I think this is one of those things, you're in a gray area, and it's whether the USDA is going to want to regulate you in that situation. My gut says maybe. I know that's not a great answer, but it's one of those things. But I mean, if you're in that situation, you're going to be low priority for USDA. I wouldn't advise you to go out and get a license in that situation, just because you are low priority. That's the kind of situation where if the USDA decides you need to get a license, they'll come and tell you, and you're not going to be public enemy number one. You're going to be someone who they just decided to do that to, and it won't be a big deal. So if they're for your personal enjoyment, they're pets, and you don't need a license. If you trade for whatever purpose, it's a gray area. Maybe yes, maybe no. But if you're just doing one or two birds every once in a while, I would stick to their pets and not get a license.
Okay, Jennifer says, is there a distinction between a bird fancier show and a bird fair? Yes and no. Shows where you're competing for ribbons, those are specifically exempt from Animal Welfare Act regulation. So you can take your birds to a show and exhibit them there for prizes, for awards, best in show, whatever. That is exempt from Animal Welfare Act. A bird fair, if you're talking about a bird fair, that is also exempt. It's a different thing. And it's exempt for a different reason, because if you're selling birds face-to-face at the bird fair, a trade day sale, they sometimes call that, that's a face-to-face retail transaction. As long as you're not required to be licensed for any other reason, you don't need to be licensed to sell birds face-to-face there. Again, with the caveat that you're selling birds that are on the pet bird list.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Nick, are there any other ones?
No, I think that's the bottom of the line.
We got him. Oh, very good. All right, you want me to close it out, or David, do you have any closing comments?
No, my closing comments are that we're still working on this. That we hope to have some of our own guidance documents ready on this in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll do another one of these for exhibitors and another one of these just in general, because I would like to get a little more participation, Steve, and I think we just need to publicize it a little bit more. So anyone who's on this, then when you guys see the next one come up, please share it widely, because this is important information for all of us to get out there. And just keep an ear out. We'll be publishing more stuff like this, and please, if you can, donate, because we will need some money to put together some of the guidance documents that we want to put together. As we talked about in the last chat, last Q&A, Steve, we need to put out a guidance document from all the organizations that give the best practices that we as aviculturists agree to, because it'll make our life easier. If we could all say, we can all point to a guidebook that says we're doing it because the guidebook says it, kind of thing. And we're going to need money for that. So please, if possible, donate. Nick, if you can share the link to donate on the chats or or wherever possible, so people can see and donate, that'd be great.
It's available on our Facebook and YouTube streams. They're always available at opabirds.org.
Thank you, Nick. And that's basically it for me, Steve. Please, everyone, just keep an eye out. We'll have another one of these soon, and I promise that we'll have one for exhibitors very soon, where we'll go through that in detail.
Okay. See, while you've made that, a couple other questions come in, so we might as well take them while we're still here. Cliff says, if you decide to stay de minimis, and your question, what would a reasonable response of proof be? Well, you're going to want to, it's kind of like proving the negative a bit, but if you can demonstrate that you're not selling in a way that would require you to be licensed, if you have good records that say otherwise, that might be it. And conversely, USDA, if they're going to a licensed facility and they see that you sold them 100 birds that wholesale, they've got proof that you're lying, right? So that's one way you've got to look at it. Cliff also writes, I've been a virtual pet store since 1992, birds only since 2010, and you have retail sales tax permits as NAICS, National Classification System. I forget the acronym specifically, but none of that matters, Cliff. If you're shipping birds, not selling them in face-to-face transactions, per the AWA regulations, you would need to be licensed. It kind of doesn't matter anymore what your virtual pet store or NAICS classification is. It's even a retail pet store, a typical mom and pop brick and mortar store, if they ship more than 8 large birds a year, they have to be licensed too. Yeah. And then there was another one here from Francine. What if you meet all license requirements, but you absolutely cannot find an attending vet of any type? What will happen? I take my birds when I need to an out-of-state veterinarian. Well, a couple of things. First of all, your out-of-state veterinarian can be your attending veterinarian. And if you take your birds out of state to see them and they're treating them out of state, you're still fine. That's perfectly legal. If any veterinary procedures happen at your facility, you would need to get those through a licensed vet in your state. That's my understanding of the law. Your attending veterinarian, even if they're the next state over, if you can convince them to come once a year, you've got it covered. If they can't do that because they're too far away, they could still be your attending vet, but you will have to find a licensed vet that can work with your attending vet that can come to your facility about once a year. Yeah, it's an unbending requirement from USDA.
The USDA though has said that if you really can't find a vet, you can tell them that, and they will help you find a vet. The only problem with that is then you will have a vet picked by the USDA, which I don't think is an ideal outcome. This really boils down to, Francine, is you just need to find a vet, someone you like, and it can be anything. Again, we need to reinforce this. It doesn't need to be an avian vet. It can literally be the county cow vet, the vet who also shoes the horses and does the dental work. I mean, it doesn't have to be, a fancy vet. You can really look up cheapest vet in your county and hire that one. They don't need to know anything about anything. It's just a bureaucratic loop to jump through. You can write up the whole veterinary care program for your vet. All you need is that someone to sign on the bottom line that says, so-and-so DVM. That's it.
Yeah, I would also suggest, I mean, if you're really having difficulty finding a vet on your own, check with whatever universities you have around, see if they have any veterinary programs, vet schools, or even vet tech programs. There will be veterinarians on staff. You can try there, or, it's all about networking. Talk to these people. They may be able to recommend somebody that can come out, but that requirement to have a veterinarian come out to your facility, we know is a big hurdle for a lot of people. That's a big challenge, and that's a requirement. Yeah. Okay, I think we caught up again. So you've made your closing remarks. I'll keep them short and see if we can escape now. No, I enjoy doing this actually, so that's fine. But yeah, thank you again, everybody, for coming. And please, again, take a few minutes to go to the OPA website, donate to us so we can raise some money to put out some of this material that we think will be helpful to you. All donations are appreciated. We really appreciate you guys being here, supporting us, and listening to us. But we need you to support us with a little cash too, so we can get some of these programs going. So we really appreciate it. And please watch our Facebook pages for the announcement for our next Q&A. And we'll see you back then. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.